Why God entrusts dark chosen ones with his shadow missions. You ever wonder why the brightest lights often come from the darkest places? Why the most powerful spiritual warriors are never the ones sitting at the front of temples, preaching peace and love in flowing robes, but rather the ones who've walked through hell and still haven't lost their ability to kneel, to serve, to burn without turning to ash? I have. I've thought about it a lot. And over the years, after thousands of hours in silence, in caves, in isolation tanks, in spiritual warfare, and yes, even filming in haunted monasteries and forgotten temples, I've come to a truth that most can't accept. God doesn't send the soft to the shadows. He sends the dark chosen ones, not because they are morally superior, not because they're perfect, but because they are forged for it. You see, when most people talk about God, they talk about light. They talk about divine love, forgiveness, ascension, angels with golden wings and white robes floating in heavenly clouds. And that's real. That's a part of it. But it's only half the picture, because what they don't teach you is that God also governs the shadow. God doesn't just live in temples, he moves through battlefields. He doesn't just whisper through prayer, he roars through collapse. He's not only found in the sunrise, he's also buried in the darkest hour of night, when your soul is screaming and no one else can hear you. That's where the shadow missions begin. That's where the dark chosen ones are called.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
God knows that not everyone can face the assignments that live in the unseen. Not everyone can stand in front of generational curses, spiritual possession, ancestral grief, or soul fragmentation, and not flinch, not break, not run away. But we can. Why? Because we already know what it feels like to be broken. We've already tasted betrayal, abandonment, persecution, shame. We know what it's like to have nights that don't end, wounds that don't heal the way people say they should, truths that no one else wants to hear. And instead of letting that destroy us, we let it forge us. God doesn't choose those who are clean. He chooses those who are willing to get dirty for truth. When you're one of the dark chosen, your life doesn't unfold like others. You don't get the easy path. Things fall apart for you not because you're cursed, but because you're being called deeper. You lose people, not because you're unlovable, but because your frequency is incompatible with mediocrity. You're misunderstood, not because you're unclear, but because your message is too ancient, too raw, too real for the surface world to digest. Spirituality for you isn't about incense and affirmations. It's about surviving the void. It's about waking up in the middle of the night with spiritual warfare pressing down on your chest and still choosing to pray into it instead of escaping it. That's why we're entrusted with shadow missions. Because we don't run from the dark. We listen to it, we study it, we sit with the possessed, we speak to the haunted. We walk into rooms where the energy is heavy and know exactly who it's attached to and how to transmute it without even saying a word. We're not afraid of demons because we've already faced our own. We've already looked in the mirror and seen what we're capable of at our worst and chosen to become something greater anyway. That's where divine trust begins, not in perfection, but in radical honesty. But here's the thing, being chosen for the shadow doesn't mean you get a badge. It means you get responsibility. It means you'll often walk alone. It means people will project onto you, fear you, even hate you, because you mirror back to them the parts of themselves they haven't faced. And when you walk into a room with the energy of someone who's seen the underworld and returned with fire in their eyes, people either awaken or run. That's not your fault. That's your assignment. You'll be asked to do things in silence, to heal people without them ever knowing your name, to confront spiritual parasites, clear ancestral altars, dismantle hidden agreements made in blood and secrecy. You'll be shown things in dreams, things that don't make sense until years later. You'll feel what others repress. You'll carry burdens that aren't yours just long enough to transmute them. And then you'll have to let them go. That's the test. Can you release what you've healed? Can you walk away from the mission without needing credit, without needing applause? God entrusts the dark chosen ones because we understand something that most never will. The light is not the goal, it's the byproduct. The goal is wholeness. The goal is sovereignty. The goal is truth, even when it's ugly, even when it costs us everything. And because we've already died 1,000 little ego deaths along the way, we're not afraid to lose again. We're not afraid to walk alone. We're not afraid to be misunderstood, exiled, even crucified spiritually. Because we know something deeper, obedience to the mission is more sacred than comfort. Now I want to ask you something that might shake you. What if the very pain you thought disqualified you was actually the reason you were chosen? What if the betrayal, the trauma, the abandonment wasn't punishment but preparation? What if you were never meant to be saved, but forged? What would happen if you stopped asking why it happened and started asking what it made you capable of? That's where the shadow missions begin, not in the light, but in the wreckage, in the places people avoid, in the silence that screams, in the questions that never got answered. That's where God sends his most trusted ones. Not the pure, not the perfect, but the willing. The divine code hidden in darkness, why pain, rejection, and isolation are sacred keys. We're taught to run from the places that hurt, to escape the moments that break us, to numb, to move on, to forget. But what if everything we were told to avoid was actually the very thing that held the code to our power? What if pain isn't a punishment but a portal? What if rejection isn't failure but redirection? What if isolation isn't loneliness but divine intimacy? You see, when God chooses a soul for shadow missions, he doesn't start by handing them a sword. He starts by stripping them of everything false, not to torture them, but to refine them, to burn away what can't hold the frequency of what's coming. Pain is the first code. It teaches you what comfort never could. It introduces you to yourself raw, real, unmasked. When you're in pain, you don't have the energy to perform. You don't have the bandwidth to pretend. Pain strips you down to the bone. And that's where the truth starts to speak. Not in the noise of your achievements, but in the silence of your suffering. That's where you start to hear the voice that's not your ego. That's where the divine begins to whisper, not with comfort, but with clarity. You don't become chosen in the moments when everything's going right. You're chosen in the moments when everything falls apart and you stay anyway. Pain reveals what you're really anchored to. When the relationship ends, when the money dries up, when the betrayal slices through your heart, when the world goes silent and God feels 1,000,000 miles away, who are you then? What do you believe then? That's the test. That's where the code is hidden. Because until you've met yourself in pain, your power is theoretical. But once you've touched your own soul in the abyss and realized you're still breathing, still burning, still standing, that's when you become undeniable. Then comes rejection. Another sacred key disguised as a wound. Rejection cuts deep because it targets the part of us that still wants to belong. We crave acceptance. We want to be seen, celebrated, chosen. But the dark chosen ones are not meant to be accepted by the world. They were sent to transform. We are not here to fit in. We are here to disrupt. And sometimes, the only way God can pull you out of a system, a relationship, a belief that's too small for your assignment, is to make it reject you, to push you out so hard, so painfully that you have no choice but to evolve. Rejection is the gate, the denial, the closed doors, the betrayals, the people who couldn't see what you carried. None of it was random. It was all coded. It was all part of the design. You were never meant to be validated by systems built on illusion. You were never meant to be accepted by tribes that feared your frequency. You were meant to be set apart, not as punishment but as positioning, to be placed in a space where your truth wouldn't be watered down just to be heard, where your fire wouldn't have to shrink just to be safe. And then comes isolation, the most misunderstood key of all. Isolation isn't abandonment, it's initiation. It's how the divine pulls you away to recalibrate your frequency. When you're isolated, it's not because you're forgotten, it's because you're being refined. God is removing the noise so you can hear the deeper instructions. He's breaking your patterns so you can stop repeating generational loops. He's silencing the world so you can finally hear your own soul again. Real isolation is holy. It's not loneliness, it's intimacy with the divine. It's the quiet place where your next level is birthed. But here's the part no one talks about. All of this hurts deeply. There's nothing glamorous about being stripped, rejected, and isolated. There are nights when the silence feels like punishment. Mornings when you wake up and can't remember what joy feels like. Moments when you wonder if you made it all up, if the visions, the dreams, the sense of being chosen was just your imagination. But that's exactly where the code activates. Because in those moments, when you choose to trust without evidence, to move without validation, to hold your frequency, even while bleeding, that's when you become unshakable. You don't find your purpose through applause. You find it in the wreckage. You find it in the moments where everything is stripped away and you're left with nothing but your breath and your faith. That's the holy ground. That's the womb of rebirth. That's where the real assignments begin. Not in the light, but in the dark. Not in clarity, but in confusion. Not in community, but in solitude. And when you emerge from that place, when you choose to rise not because you're healed, but because you're called, that's when the shadow missions begin to unfold. So, let me ask you something most people avoid. What if the very things you've been praying to escape are the exact things God is using to prepare you? What if the pain is sacred? What if the rejection is protection? What if the isolation is intimacy in disguise? What would shift in your life if you stopped resisting it and started receiving it? Because this is not punishment. This is precision. This is the divine code hidden in darkness. And only those brave enough to stay in the fire long enough get to decode it. The unseen army, how the dark chosen ons operate behind the veil to shift reality. There is a realm that exists beneath everything you've ever been taught to believe is real. A realm beneath the surface of society, culture, even spirituality itself. It's not visible to the naked eye. It's not spoken of in mainstream teachings. But it moves everything. It's the undercurrent, the energetic architecture that shapes human behavior, collective consciousness, even the unfolding of historical events. And within this hidden realm, God has placed His most trusted, most refined, most dangerous agents, the dark chosen ones. We don't operate in temples. We don't wear uniforms. We don't wait for permission. We move in silence. We shift things at the root. We are the unseen army. We're not here to be celebrities of the spirit. We're not here to be adored, followed, or praised. We're here to intervene in families, in bloodlines, in timelines. We're here to break the loops that have gone unchecked for generations. We're here to walk into rooms and shift the frequency without saying a single word. That's the level we operate on, not because we're better, but because we're built for it. Our lives have been the training ground. The betrayals, the breakdowns, the spiritual attacks, the nights no one saw us cry, it was all preparation. God was forging warriors, not worshippers. Architects, not followers. And now we're being positioned in silence, strategically placed in companies, families, cities, and spiritual communities to act as living codes of disruption. You see, we don't need to announce ourselves. When you carry shadow authority, your presence is the announcement. You walk into a space and the energy shifts, not because you perform, but because your frequency confronts what's false. People feel you without understanding why. Some are drawn to you instantly, others recoil. That's not personal, it's energetic law. When you carry divine fire, it either awakens or exposes, and when it's shadow fire refined in the furnace of pain, rejection, and solitude, it doesn't just awaken people. It shakes them. It destabilizes what they've built their identity on. That's how we shift reality, not through force but through frequency. We're not bound to linear time. We sense things before they happen. We feel the tremors in the energetic field days, weeks, sometimes months before the surface world catches up. That's why we often look too intense, too serious, or paranoid to those still sleeping. But we're not paranoid, we're pre-encoded. We're built to sense what others are blind to. And when the veil thins, when the spiritual climate begins to shift, we move. We pray in codes. We speak in silence. We dream vividly. We fast without announcing it. We grieve what hasn't happened yet. We intervene in the unseen, and most of the time, no one even knows it happened. That's the point. The unseen army doesn't need recognition. We need precision. We don't ask for likes or followers, we ask for clarity. We don't chase platforms, we build altars in hidden places. We don't argue with egoic minds, we speak to souls directly. And when the time comes, when a shift is required on the deepest level, we're already in position. We've already seen it. We've already wept for it. We've already moved through it in our spirit. That's how we shift reality, not by reacting but by preparing the field. But here's the sacred truth. This path is not glamorous. You will not be celebrated. In fact, the more effective you are, the less visible you may become. That's how true shadow missions work. You're sent in, you shift the field, and then you disappear. Sometimes the people you helped will turn against you. Sometimes they'll forget your name. Sometimes they'll rewrite you as the villain because their ego couldn't handle your mirror. And still you stay on mission, because you didn't come for approval, you came for impact. So let me ask you something most don't dare to ask. Are you okay with being the one who changes everything, even if no one ever knows it was you? Can you hold the weight of that kind of purpose? Can you love without attachment, serve without applause, and disrupt without needing to explain yourself? Because that's what it means to be part of the unseen army. That's what it means to be a dark chosen one. You're not here to be seen. You're here to see everything and still choose to love, to act, to stay aligned. You're here to move in silence and leave behind a legacy of energetic recalibration. You're not building a platform. You're building a new world, one vibration at a time. The final hour, why the end time missions require the boldness of those who've already died before. There's a moment in every soul's journey where the stakes become undeniable, where the illusion begins to crack at every level, personally, globally, spiritually. We are in that moment now. The world is shifting rapidly, and the veil that once separated the seen from the unseen is thinner than it's ever been. This is not a metaphor. It's a spiritual emergency. And in this final hour, God is not calling the loudest voices or the most polished preachers. He's calling the dead ones. The ones who've already died inside 100 times and chosen to rise anyway. The ones who have nothing left to lose because they already surrendered everything that wasn't real. The ones who don't just talk about transformation, they are transformation. You see, end-time missions aren't for the spiritually trendy. They're not for those who want to manifest a mansion and call it a miracle. They're not for those still obsessed with being liked, understood, or admired. They're for the ones who've been exiled, silenced, and torn apart. The ones who carry fire in their bones and silence in their eyes. The ones who've been called too intense, too much, or crazy simply because they felt what others ignored. That level of spiritual sensitivity isn't a disorder, it's design. It's God's way of placing his seismic sensors inside those he trusts the most. And this trust, it doesn't come with comfort. It comes with clarity. The kind of clarity that cuts through illusion like a sword. When you've already died, when you've faced the abyss and made peace with it, you're no longer manipulated by fear. You're no longer swayed by trends or applause. You're no longer tempted to trade your truth for belonging. That's why God uses the already dead ones, because we walk with resurrection power. We don't just believe in the light, we embody it after walking through the dark. And that makes us immune to the systems designed to control the surface dwellers. In the final hour, you will be called to act when others freeze, to speak when others go silent, to confront when others compromise. And it won't be because you want to, but because you must. Something inside you won't let you stand down. That's the mark of the end-time warrior. You don't fight because you're angry. You fight because you're aligned, because you know what's coming, because you've already seen it in your dreams, in your visions, in the aching of your bones. This isn't paranoia. It's prophetic preparation. And it's why you've been through what you've been through. God was not punishing you, he was fortifying you. You were never meant to be a spectator in this hour. You were meant to be a signal, a living, breathing transmission of divine defiance, not against people but against the systems that enslave them. You were meant to carry the codes that collapse false timelines. You were meant to walk into spaces and confront the spiritual rot behind the smiling faces. And yes, it's dangerous. But you've already died once, haven't you? You've already lost what you thought you couldn't live without. And you're still here, still burning, still listening. That's the kind of soul the divine entrusts with final hour missions. So let me ask you one last question. What are you still afraid to lose that's keeping you from fully accepting what you've been called to do? Because to step into the final hour, you must be willing to leave everything behind: your identity, your image, your comfort, your safety. You must be willing to walk with fire in your chest and silence on your tongue. You must be willing to obey the voice inside you, even when it contradicts everything outside you. This path isn't for everyone. But if something in your spirit just said yes without hesitation, then you already know. You've already been chosen. You've already been prepared. And now, in this final hour, you are being called out of hiding. Because the ones who've already died, they're the ones who can no longer be controlled. They're the ones who shift history without needing credit. They're the ones who carry the last codes. You are one of them. Now, go.